was German Water Partnership, with whom we have signed a MOU in February. And we are very happy that things are moving, even in lockdowns in every country. We still have the opportunity to exchange. In this subject, pandemic response plan for water and sanitation providers is not only focused on COVID-19, but we take the opportunity of the COVID-19 to look at any kind of pandemic that could arise anytime during the lifetime of a company, and to see how this could be tackled with a very good preparation of responses to pandemic. So Matthew, thank you very much for these few words that I'm saying, and I hope that this session will go on very well. Take care, you all, and have a good session.
Thank you, Sylvain, for these words. As I said, my name is Mateus, and I will be the facilitator today. Me and my colleagues from AKUT, which is an engineering and consulting firm based in Germany, which is also a part of the German Water Partnership. We are part of a network that has been working mainly in Latin America in organizing these sessions, these webinars. We have, just for you to understand a bit of the context, we have organized similar events to this in Brazil and Peru, and we have invitations to work in other countries in Latin America and Central America. So our main goal is to enhance the resilience of service providers facing COVID-19, especially COVID-19. But as you said, Sylvain, it's of course the same approach could be used for other threats. We try to deal with this problem by bringing service providers together and promoting exchanges of experiences. So it's for us all both a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. Tomorrow we will do another similar webinar in French, and I hope soon that we'll be able to do a third one in Portuguese, so that we will cover part of the African continent. It's our first experience here with these webinars with African colleagues. So it's very, very, very interesting and very nice for us to be here with you today. Before we start, I would like to share some more information with you that relates to the document and to the information that we will share today. Well, against the background of our previous experience with the webinars, we saw the importance of having a plan to counter the COVID menace. Not only the COVID menace, but this is the biggest threat that we have today. So we realized also that many service providers do not have a plan yet. So we concluded that being prepared, that having a plan that allows us to be prepared to face such a menace is the main condition for success. And by success, I mean not only guaranteeing service provision to users so that they can wash their hands and prevent COVID, but also protecting the health of our workers. This is also very important. These guys must be on the street, and they are as relevant as our doctors, nurses, and health personnel. So it's very important to protect them as well. And well, we developed then this document that we will present to you today, which is less a model than an ensemble of information, of ideas, of hints to be analyzed, discussed, and adapted to one's reality. We do not intend this document to be the perfect plan for people to copy. That's not our goal. We want to discuss elements of this document with you so that you adapt to your reality those informations, those measures that you consider important. So having said that, I must add that we chose to bring to you only the most important elements of this document. We did not have the time to discuss it all in detail, but we prepared a very, I hope, very dynamic afternoon with inputs from our team and presentations from service providers from South Africa, Zambia, and Uganda, to whom I thank in advance for sharing their experiences with us. And after the presentations, we will have a session of questions and answers. But since we are since the room is not this full, maybe we can try today another experience. Normally, we do this questions and answer sessions in the end, and people ask questions through the chat function of this platform. But maybe we can try today to do something different. Maybe we can try to open the microphones and discuss freely among us. I think that's it will be for us a new experience, but I think it's worth trying. And maybe we can make the inscriptions through the chat. Like, for example, I see here in my screen, Matthew Langol, good morning. And for example, when Matthew wants to ask a question, he just writes his name. I want to make a question in the chat so that we can organize the debate. I hope this is fine for you. It's very, it's for me as the facilitator of this webinar, very inspiring, and I hope this will work well. That's for now for the introduction. I would like to invite now my colleague Janis Hustige to start the first input of our afternoon, and I wish us all a very nice, a very rich debate, a very rich work. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Matthäus. So I'm going to take over from here. Let's see. Right. So I would, kick off this presentation of this plan, this pandemic response plan, which is a plan that we have specifically created for water and sanitation operators. Obviously, well, this plan applies not only to some people of such a company, of such an operator, but it applies to all company units. It also applies to all subcontracted staff, all people basically who enter the company premises or the administrative locations. This plan, this pandemic response plan, which we call PRP, you can basically call it whatever you want. This is the name we chose. This plan here is a draft which we adapted to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you do such a plan, obviously you need to always adapt it to the characteristics and development of the pandemic that you're dealing with. Because we are having the COVID-19 pandemic right now, this is what we adapted it to. Very important here, Matthäus, you already said this, is to underline that this is only a guide with some recommendations for action. So we don't have, we wouldn't like to argue that we have a complete exhaustive list of measures here. This is a set of ideas which can set you up for starting to develop your own plan. And for that, we hope that it's very useful. There are two main goals of this pandemic response plan, which are the protection of the health of all employees and persons who are working for the operator. So that could be everyone who works in the water supply network, in the plant sewers, etc. And secondly, to minimize the economic damage for the company. And in order to reach these goals, there's a couple of subset goals, some more specific goals. Firstly, to minimize the risk of infection for the workers. Secondly, to ensure the maintenance of basic operational functions for drinking and wastewater services. These could be, for example, the collection and the treatment of wastewater, which are very important. Then thirdly, the reorientation of all resources to the maintenance of the primary processes. So the key processes, all resources must be bundled towards that function. And last but not least, employees must always be informed and prepared for the specific tasks that they're going to carry out during the pandemic. Now, the general management of a water and sanitation operator is obviously responsible for the management of the company and therefore also in charge in case of a crisis such as a pandemic. During a pandemic, he or she must particularly carry out the following functions. Firstly, the general manager needs to set some guidelines on the general direction that these measures are going to take. Secondly, he or she decides on the continuity of operations and the special measures that are required in order to reach this continuity of operations. Then thirdly, the general manager decides or determines at which point in time, under which conditions, which measures shall be applied. So as we shall see in the following, there are several steps in which measures are going to be activated. So this, the point in time where these should be activated shall be decided by the general management. Fourthly, it should participate in external crisis committees. These could be among regional operators or also with local, regional governments, with the health sector, etc. Then, because in many countries you will experience a lockdown, some workers will not be able to roam freely in the city and be able to carry out the tasks. So they will need to have some special permits. So you would be in charge of obtaining a permit for your employees. And this also must include the external subcontracted staff. And lastly, general management should set communication guidelines for the internal and external communication, which my colleague is going to talk to you about a bit more in detail in a few minutes. This general management obviously doesn't have to do it all by itself. It has a whole team to support it, which we call it a pandemic response team. This team is comprised of several functions, and really you're free to, you're welcome, or I would say you have to adapt it to your own realities in your country, but also specifically in your company in this case. Maybe you have a small company, so you want to, you wouldn't have that many people to fill in all these functions. So some people can carry out several functions at the same time. This pandemic response team will be responsible for the operationalization of the guidelines that the general management has set. It will, especially in the initial phases of the pandemic phase of the pandemic, it will assist with analyses and with the planning of measures. And the members which are on this board or in this team normally would hold senior positions in their respective company. So then they have, because they are in senior positions, they should have ample knowledge of the processes and the procedures that are usually established in the respective water and sanitation operator. Ideally, this pandemic response team is comprised of these functions, as I said, but this may vary, and you can feel free to adapt them. But talking about ideally, I will just mention there should, in any case, be the general manager on this team. Then there should be the coordinator. So one person should be in charge of coordinating and holding the team together to coordinate to coordinate all the actions that are being taken during the pandemic phase, and should maintain an overview of all the planned actions. And because he might fall ill because of the pandemic, there should be some 1 or 2 substitutes to replace this coordinator. A third person, which is very important as well, is the communications manager, who my colleague is going to talk a bit more about in a few minutes. Then we have other managers, such as the human resources manager, also from financial resources, procurement, somebody who knows about occupational safety, a health manager, which could also be the company doctor if you have one. There could be also a representative of the employees, or other managers of operational and administrative units, as you wish and as you have it in your company reality. We structured our pandemic response plan into 5 phases. And these phases all reflect the development of the pandemic and contain appropriate measures to be taken when each phase comes into effect. So in the phase 0 is the pre-pandemic phase. I'm going to talk about the phases in the next slide a bit more in detail. So we have first the pre-pandemic, then the phase where we analyze and plan actions. Then these actions are implemented, so actions are being taken in phase 2. Phase 3, actions or more extended actions are taken. And finally, we return to normality in phase 4. So now to each phase, 1 or 2 words. In the pre-pandemic phase, this is, just let me add one more thing. The start and the end of each phase is decided exclusively by the general management and the coordinator together. And they should define criteria themselves. We don't say exactly when you will have to start each phase. This is up to you, but this could be, for example, that you want to start phase 2 when you experience a staff absence of sort of say 25%, and take extended action in phase 3 when you have 40% absence. Also, every time that we proceed to the next phase, the actions that have been taken before in the previous phases remain in force. So now about the pre-pandemic phase. This is declared when a situation emerges that would suggest a particular health risk. It's kind of a pre-alarm or a phase of alertness. So during this phase, there's not yet any concrete personnel or protective measures initiated. It's more about defining strategies, updating information. Key measures would be, for example, the definition or the designation of the pandemic response team, the development or the update of a communication strategy, as well as the setting up of a data platform, especially for the pandemic response team, in order to be able to coordinate amongst themselves the actions that they will have to take. During phase 1, we have to analyze and plan actions. So this phase contains the active preparation for an escalation of the situation by analyzing very critical points in our processes which are necessary for ensuring the upholding of the minimum services. In phase 2, we then implement the actions which we have planned before, and we might have to readjust this to the current situations, as we never really can plan them that far ahead. We always have to adapt it again. Here it should be said that measures should always be coordinated with the team to ensure that the approach is compatible really with all the operators' procedures. If we have an emergency or the situation really escalates further, we have to proceed to phase 3 and take extended actions. There might be several reasons that would call for such an activation of this phase. This could be that, as I said, the number of available staff reaches critical levels, which would then require adjustments to guarantee the functioning of the most vital processes. Or it could also be that there's a lack of sufficient chemical supplies which are needed for guaranteeing good drinking water quality. Or it could also perhaps turn out that suddenly it's possible that the virus is transmitted via wastewater. But let me remind you here that as of now, there's no scientific reason or study which claims that there is a possibility of virus transmission via wastewater as of today. So if we have passed this pandemic phase, we want to return to normality. The decision on whether we do return to normality should be taken following close contact with health authorities, who should be very much aware of the fact, for example, that pandemics usually occur in waves. So even if we see that the numbers of cases are reducing, this does not have to mean that it's all over and that we can return to normality, because there might be a second or third or more waves. Then during this phase, we also need to define the so-called new normality. So we need to see which of the measures that we've taken during the pandemic will remain in force, because there's a new situation where they have to stay active. And lastly, it would always be good to evaluate the plan itself and optimize it for future events. So thank you very much. I would like to now give back the word to you, Matthäus. And I think, I would actually pass over to Marina, my colleague, and she will talk to you a bit more on the part of communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. Hello, all. I will continue with the communication. The communication is a very important point in the pandemic response plan. So, an appropriate communication and information strategy should be developed for each phase of the plan. The aim of the communication is to ensure a functioning communication structure between all persons involved, also under restricted and/or in quarantine conditions. For example, between the pandemic response team, water and sanitation operators, branch office, and home office. In addition, the communication strategy should ensure that essential information is rapidly transmitted to all employees. So there is two kinds of communications, internal and external. In order to ensure the functioning of operation and the safety of employees, it is recommended that an internal communication channel be stabilized, especially in case of illness or suspected illness, that the employees can report directly to the pandemic response team. For example, returnees from risk areas should be informed about the procedure in advance to prevent them from showing up for work and possibly infect colleagues. The pandemic response team should establish also contact channels with public authorities such as the Public Health Department, also with committees, customers, and service providers. And they have to ensure that there is a exchange information periodically. So as I said before, an appropriate communication and information strategy should be developed for each phase of the plan. For the phase 0 of pre-pandemic, this phase focuses primarily on dissemination of key guidelines and contact information. So in this phase, it's important the information that allows the close coordination with the pandemic response team members. Also, information on operational planning for the pandemic, like restrictions to company operations or teleworking. Also, rules for dealing with third-party service contractors and customers, and rules for the personal conduct amongst employees, like personal hygiene or keeping physical distance. Also, it's important to share the process in case of symptoms. So for the pandemic phases, this is from 1 to 3, it's important that the regular information on the current situation at the development of the pandemic. So also measures and operational restrictions according to the declared pandemic phase. Information on personal behavior and hygiene measures in addition to the normal ones. Presence, absence of staff, and information on the new staff planning, and informing external organizations such as suppliers, customers about the declared pandemic phase and implication. So, and for the last one, the phase 4, return to normality, it's important to inform about the restart of the operations, also about special events related to the pandemic, new staff and holiday planning, and information to external organizations about the completed pandemic phases. So these all phases should be adapted constantly to the development of the pandemic situation. So here we have an example of a contact directory that should be used in the phase 0, pre-pandemic, to allow the coordination between the team members, staff, and authorities. This kind of directory should be kept constantly updated. Another important point is the personal planning. Due to the high infection rate of COVID-19, a significant number of employees are expected to stay away from home. So taking into account the analysis of key processes, staff can be partially reduced for the time of the pandemic. So the employees have to concentrate on key processes for the continuity of the drinking water supply and wastewater treatment. So the personal planning must focus on the goals of the pandemic response plan. That these are to ensure the health of the personnel and keep the key processes operational. This is a continuous task that must be adapted to the current situation and therefore requires that there is a register of availability that is updated on a daily basis. Communication between the pandemic response team, the general management, and human resource management is therefore essential. And here we have a list of recommendations for the personal planning. For example, ensure the replacement of and staff reserves, in particular for the critical processes and the pandemic response team, because they have the key functions of the company. Also, limit the disease transmission and prohibit personal contact. Also, it's important to apply extraordinary work plans that might even include voluntary on-site accommodation of workers for periods of at least 1 or 2 weeks. Also, it's important to analyze the possibility of hiring external personnel, and can be necessary the training of company personnel in key processes by employees with a specific experience. Also, is necessary to explore the possibilities for remote working from home when this is possible, especially for administrative staff and equipped workers with mobile equipment. And the last one is the reorganization of holidays. So here we can see an example of assessment and location of personnel based on the organizational chart. So we can see the different departments and the name of the employers and the situation, like if they work in the office, they have home office, or they are infected. So this kind of chart gives us an overview of the company. Also, we have this table as an example of the personnel analysis according to their main functions and replacement function, with the name of the employer, the main function, and also the possible replacement function. Now I give to Mateus to present Professor Haman Kazan.
Thanks, Yanis. Thanks, Marina, for these inputs. As I said in the beginning, the idea here is that we, from our team, present some aspects of the document, of the ideas, the main elements of this document, and that we count on the support, on the experience of service providers that bring in concrete elements that relate to the aspects that we're discussing. So I would like to invite now Professor Haman Kazan. He's General Manager, Scientific Services of Randwater, South Africa. And he's going to discuss the experience of Randwater in the aspect of personal planning. Good afternoon, Mr. Haman Kazan. Thank you for being here with us. I would like to ask you just quickly so that we have an idea of the size of the conditions that your company works in. So I would like to ask you just to clarify for us in a couple of minutes, how many customers do you have? How many workers do you have? And if you have any news on the current situation of COVID in your country and in the region you're working. And yes, and I will remind you during the presentation about the time, like 3 minutes before, and I will remind you so that we can have time for the discussion. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mateus. Can you hear me there, okay?
Yes, yes, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, Yanis, for your presentation prior. Pleasure to see you there, Marina. Thank you for your emails. At least I can put a face to the name now. And all of my friends and colleagues from the rest of the continent, Mahmoud, I could see Papa is also on the line, Matthew. Delighted to be with you here and to see that everybody is safe and in good spirit. So perhaps let me start with what you asked me as an introduction. Randwater is a publicly owned water utility which produces about just under 5,000 megaliters of water a day. We supply this water to 17 municipalities who then supply it via reticulation onto the consumers. And so eventually we supply about 16 million consumers in the economic hub of the African continent. The number of workers that we have is in just in excess of 3,000, just below 3,500 employees, in order for us to produce all of this water and reticulate and then send it through the distribution system. COVID in South Africa, yes, we have been firstly under lockdown for the last 7 odd weeks. We are looking soon, hopefully, for an announcement to gently release the lockdown in a systematic way. South Africa has developed an interesting 5-step risk-based approach towards this. So you have a level 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, which is total freedom, so to say. And this is all based on looking at the spread, looking at which industries to open systematically, and so forth. We've had in the region of about 15,000 cases. We've had just over 200 deaths, trying hard to increase the rate of testing, since you know, we would understand as people like engineers and scientists that the extent to which you test gives you a picture at a point in time. And so, you know, not many countries are getting to a level where the level of testing is what some statisticians would call statistically sound, in order for you to have a real picture of what is out there. At a point in time, we have a picture, and then, of course, we have our great epidemiologists who have various models and predictions and projections. But as I indicated on another Zoom meeting last week, predictions are not facts. They are just that, predictions. The facts is what we know and what we measure from the small percentage of the population that we sample. So that being said, it's been an interesting experience. You know, we can say up front that I don't know that there are many utilities in the world who plan for a pandemic. Let's start on that basis. What we did plan for here at Rand Water is a strike. Given the unionized labor environment in South Africa, we do have plans in place in the event that we have a strike that occurs. Now, one of those plans that we had put together in consultation with labor over the years was a list of essential services staff. And so this was all predicated on the notion that should there be a strike, who is essential, who should be at work, who would be allowed to strike, etc. Of course, the central tenet upon which all of this is built is that the function of a water utility fundamentally is to produce water supplied 24 hours a day. And of course, we pride ourselves in producing this water to the standard of the World Health Quality. And of course, the South African national standard. So this is the non-negotiable in our business. And I would like to think that that should apply to almost every water and sanitation utility in the world. The business has to go on and the people need water. And interestingly, in this instance, whilst we have been preparing for waterborne disease, I think ever since human beings have been on the planet and been producing water in one form or another, you know, we have all types of systems like risk-based strategies on water safety planning and some very innovative and proactive approaches to ensure that our water quality is safe and that the organisms do not penetrate the water, or should they do that, we're able to eliminate them, etc. Interestingly, COVID-19 is not waterborne. That's a fact. We know that is a scientific fact. Yes, you rightly indicated, you know, we're not even sure that it's viable in the wastewater. There's no scientific evidence at this point. To that extent, we do know that some remnants of the RNA has been found in wastewater, which doesn't indicate that the virus is viable or alive. It may just be having some remnants there, which has a very, very interesting application, which is not the subject of today's conversation, but you can use that for fingerprinting to determine what is the extent of contamination of communities, and perhaps then that information can be used for you to target where you do your testing in priority, etc., etc. But you've asked me today, and I appreciate your request for me to talk on the experience on personnel planning. So we had this essential services list, as I indicated, and that was our first reference point. But in our experience, what we found was that essential services list, whilst it helped, wasn't designed for an instance of a pandemic. So yes, through iteration, given that we've now been in this situation for 2.5 months already, so to say, we've learned to adapt that list and modify it, and managers take appropriate view on who they need at work and who shouldn't be at work. And the whole notion of who should be at work is based on what is, I have coined a new phrase, used a different word rather, and it's called, which are your staff that are critical to your operations? Critical staff required to sustain your business, to produce the water, to distribute it, to make sure that it's tested properly, etc., etc. Ensure your maintenance is being done. If you're able to do maintenance, ensure that your projects are continuing in terms of your infrastructure. If you're able to, during lockdown situations, those service providers may not be available. You may not want them on site because of the spread of the germ, etc. So what we did is we used the essential services list to start with. We then began amending that. On the operational front, of course, we have different shifts of operators because we are in a country that is labor intensive in terms of industrialization. We put in a few little tricks, like where there are shift workers, we try to ensure that each of the different shifts, the workers in each of those shifts, do not make contact with each other. Because the risk you suffer is that you could lose 2 of your 3 shifts by people getting sick, and then you really have a challenge on your hands in terms of your operations. So that's one of the tricks that we use. In the laboratory, we also went on to a shift mode. So we determined who was critical, and it's very interesting, I must say, out of being 30 years in this industry, we've come to realize that we actually don't need more than 20–30% of our staff to keep this operation going, which means that the majority of our staff had to work from home. Working from home brought on new challenges because whilst it's great to have for those employees who have that luxury, it requires all of the technologies, the hardware, the software, the ability to link up, which comes with another risk of its own, colleagues. The whole notion of cybersecurity. You need Skype, you need Zoom, you need Teams. So fortunately, we sprang into action pretty quickly. And from your former presentation, we have a COVID response team. We have a joint operations committee. I'm the chair of the COVID response team. We meet regularly on a weekly basis. We have people from across the organization. We have an action list. We have an accountability deadline for each of the actions. We review these each week. We see how we're making progress. And it's a little easier said than done, some 8 weeks down the line now. Initially, it's quite challenging because you realize that you need masks, you need sanitizers to keep your staff safe that are coming to work. You need all sorts of protective equipment. The demand for this material is high globally. It's not easily to procure and to acquire. The prices are volatile. It's a supply and demand situation in the market. So what we put in is we provide our staff that are at work, the critical staff, with sanitizers, with masks. We've put in a regime of screening, which is temperature measurement. So the staff that come to work are screened by a temperature measurement daily. We make a record of their temperature measurement. They're asked a few questions about the exposure level, etc. If the temperature is higher than it should be, then they kindly ask to go home, to see a doctor, to ensure that they get better, because having an elevated temperature doesn't mean that you have the COVID virus. It simply means you have a fever and you could be having some other virus or a bacterium, etc. And therefore you may present a risk to colleagues who are trying to keep the business going on the critical front. So that is, on the one hand. On the other hand, the Department of Health has been very active in the country, and regulations come through on a routine basis. We are sensitive to people that are over the age of 60 and people that have comorbidities. You may be taking certain prescription medications for high blood pressure, for diabetes, etc. We try not to have people over 60 to work and be considered as critical. However, this is not cut and dry, if I may say so, because there are some people that are over 60 years that are critical to the business. They have to come to the business in order to discharge their service, and they're happy to do that. There are also people that are less than 60 that have comorbidities, but are still happy to come because they're considered critical. So we try to balance and be responsible and try to keep as many people that are not critical away from the business, providing the tools to them at home, and ensuring we work by email, etc. And you don't think of some of the challenges that you have to deal with when it comes to home technology, and I'll surface one on that front. We did not at the time have a system where our people from home could be signing documents electronically, which is in a safe method, which is done on an accredited basis, etc. So this creates a simple but different challenge. So people would have reports at home, they would need to print them out, they would then sign it, they would then scan it, they would then send it back on. So, we're looking into that, and we're pretty close to a solution there. So whilst it's been a challenge, there have been some phenomenal opportunities in terms of the way that we're changing our way of work from home and even internally. Of course, social distance.
Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt. We are above 7 minutes, just for you to know. Thank you. Thank you.
2 minutes more and conclude. So, we've learned some key lessons on this front. I'm sure that we'll get better at it. I'd like to say in conclusion that I don't want to overemphasize communication, but I don't believe I can ever overemphasize it, because you have people that are at work, you have people that are at home, and they all need to be informed on an ongoing basis. So that's important. And then finally, we have also developed a back to work protocol, because someday, and that day doesn't appear to look very soon, when this virus is all done with, so to say, and when we say done with, we mean for now, we would need our staff to come back, and we cannot have 3,000 people coming back to work all on one day. So we have put in protocols as to how we're going to phase this in and ensure that it happens properly. So finally, what will the new normal look like? I'd like to believe nothing will be like it used to be, but how we shape the new normal going forward, it's in the hands of us as water leaders, so that we climb up this technology curve, we make the right changes, and we keep the business running. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks a lot for this. Very interesting. I would like to go back to our team so that we can continue the exposition. Please, Matthew. Hi, Matthew.
Thank you, colleagues. My name is Matthew Langol, also from Akut. Thank you, Professor, for your profound experience. This brings in also really a benchmark on one of the most important part of any company during a pandemic. The objective, of course, for any company or water and sanitation organization is to, during this time, is to safely manage water and sanitation and, let's say, hygiene services, because it's an essential part in any pandemic. And COVID-19 has offered even a much more difficult challenge that brings in the idea of both affecting operation and administrative system of every organization. And there brings in also an element of how the process of providing safe and clean water to people in this difficult situation a very important part. That also gives us a component to understand really what are the critical processes that are required in maintaining operations, and those that can be restricted in this emergency state to be determined. critical processes, we can kind of define it as those that directly affect the continuity and quality of provision of water, sanitation, and hygiene services to the community. And as we can see, they are dependent on several factors, basing on the suppliers, also the external service providers for tackling the potential supply bottlenecks or giving remedies to failure in the water and sanitation services. This therefore gives us to identify what are the critical processes in the provision of clean water and sanitation facilities. That means we have to look at the whole chain of the production. That means to identify in all processes, the major processes, as well as looking at sub-processes and also processes that are interdependent on one another. And of course, then to prioritize really what is the most critically needed at this time, because as you also mentioned, Professor mentioned very clearly, that there is also a change in the staffing of the companies. So in this case, we can look at what is the most necessary to enable to sustain fast, sustainable access, to enable or provide water, and of course the waste management as well. So when we look at our small graph next to us here, we can see from the drinking water perspective, we can identify within the production of drinking water process what are critical. Distribution to the users, what is necessary or what is the most necessary process that has to be attained. And of course also to build on a system that deals with breakdowns. When you look at the waste management perspective, you can also look as it is given in our short table. So it is necessary really to identify the critical points in the infrastructure, starting from control room to subdivision, or maybe for smaller water suppliers, the processes can be minimal. And of course, we should also look at the operational side of the process. That means dealing with the ordering, the logistic component. When you're looking at chemicals, we are looking at security of the facilities, all these external systems that back up then the production. So looking at that, then you can also look at the sub processes, you know, prioritizing specific sub processes and the ones which depend on each other, what supplies are needed for the execution of the task, under which conditions the execution of the task becomes critical, and what knowledge and qualification, as professors already said, the key critical staff that should be assessed vis-a-vis their qualification and competency. So for different companies, of course, prioritization is dependent, but of course, when you have also cases where you have possible restriction, like for this COVID-19, where you have this need for essential services to get kind of permits also for travel. So this has to be more also assessed on top of, as part of the critical processes and resources planning. So from here, next please. Next. Next. There. So, no, back please. So as already said, you know, the key supplies, the supplies also needs, you have to plan it ahead of time. Ahead of time means you have to plan for supplies that are already within 3 months, that are ready to take stocks of what you have and see if it can sustain you for roughly maybe 3 months. And if there are no alternatives, then such a supply we can also say is critical. Then you really need to plan for that. And of course, in such kind of supply, you have to look at if there are alternatives for it. And if there are no alternatives, then it also affects back on looking at your critical supply. Next. And of course, then you can develop also a chart like what is given on the screen to see that in every process, you can analyze what the supplies are there. And of course, the supply taking stock on what is within 3 months. And if it is less, then this has to be restocked. And of course, that gives you kind of the red light where you can say, hey, within this 1 month, we need, for instance, coagulants, or you need disinfection or chlorine. And if that is not available for your stock for the 3 months, then in such a case, that becomes a critical case for your operation. Because for a pandemic, minimum to have kind of a backstopping that this critical supplies should be really something that you have in stock before they completely run down. Next. I saw somebody also talking about critical contractors. You know, in every company, there are really provision that you cannot do everything alone. So, for instance, security. Most of the companies, the security supply is always an outsource. Supply of chemicals, supply of parts of the infrastructure. And these are critical things that can really bring a company to a standstill. You have to also look at if there are contractors that are not as an essential or service provider, that then you have to look at, are there alternative companies that you can plan ahead of time that enables you to kind of call in to enable the the process to work on. So these are, and of course, when we also think about materials, pipes or valves or pumps, and if at the time of the pandemic you were almost running out of certain diameters, for instance, are there alternatives that you can reduce or you increase? So this has to be assessed case by case to enable you not to run out of supply during the most critical time. Of course, when you look at internet maintenance, if it is all outsourced, or disposal of waste, this then gives you an opportunity for planning to enable to set up your response plan immediately that you see a red light, that you are able to call in a backup or alternative contractor or alternative supply or alternative equipment to enable that within this time. For instance, for this COVID-19, water is a major essential service for preventing or reducing the spread of COVID. And of course, in planning for that, there are also impact of having either external or internal rules that really needs to change. You have, For instance, for COVID-19, you have hygiene issues that you have to put in new rules. You have to see how internal operations of the company is. You have staffs that are out, and then you have to bring in maybe new staffs that could do extra activities, for instance, like cleaning materials or cleaning the compound, or because with hygiene, you need to maybe it was not part of your planning. And of course, when you have external contractors that are coming in, all these rules and regulations have been directly impacted by this. So of course, then budget-wise, you have all these issues that comes with the hygiene, of course, protection, water, disinfection, and of course, when you look at what COVID-19 has done, every surface systems have to be cleaned. For instance, sometimes we are using fingerprints for access of the offices. All this is now impacting kind of directly on different rules for the organization. So this planning perspective also has to be included in your, as part of your essential service. Next. So basically, from those rules, we've given a short overview of some of the key things that we see that should be taken care of during this planning for your pandemic response. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for this input. I would like to invite now Mr. Mahmoud Lutaya. He's General Manager from Kampala Region National Water Sewerage Corporation in Uganda. And he will speak to us about his experience in the theme hygiene. Thank you, Mr. Mahmoud, for being here with us and sharing this experience with us. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I greet everyone who is attending this webinar, and also thank the organizers for this very interesting discussion. I'll share a bit like Professor Mark did also, start with a small perspective on the situation in Uganda. As far as COVID is concerned, we have, as of now, we had the first case came around March, towards the end of March. Right now, so far, we've registered around 243 confirmed cases in Uganda. We so far we haven't lost anyone. We have registered 63 recoveries, and also right now we only have 57 people who are admitted. The challenge we have right now is within the country, there's been some bit of control, but we have the number of truck drivers who cross borders, and that's where the numbers have shot up. And what we are doing is that's why you see the number of recoveries and admitted cases could be a bit different. They don't add up, meaning that sometimes when they get a truck driver who comes from cross border, we're able to take them back from where they're coming from. But I think there's been strict controls within the country. That's why we've managed to register some of those cases. As a country, we've been under lockdown. A number of services were suspended. Apart from the essential services, where water happens to be one of them, but also the restrictions with movement. We are under a national curfew, so we up to 7. The curfew starts from 7 p.m. up to 6:30 in the morning. So that in a way has also affected the way we operate as an organization. Now, National Water is a government institution also, and we're responsible for providing water and sewage services in the towns that are always gazetted by government. Right now, we have 256 towns that we operate across the country. Population-wise, the towns we serve, or the area we serve, is around 15 million. And we have over 700 1,000 customers. Our staffing total, we are around 4,000. But right now, we are operating with almost half of our given the whole aspect of decongesting operation. Like I think the previous discussion has been, this situation caught everyone, we didn't plan for it. So we had to act very fast as an organization. We had to activate our business continuity and emergency response plans that we had in place. And we had to do all necessary to make sure that we continue operating. So there were 4 main areas of focus. One, it was the protection of the staff and also the community. The other one was business continuity, and I'll share how we managed to do that. And then there's the other one which was also focusing a lot on communication, and I think that has been shared. So we've had to engage a lot the community and also the staff that we're operating. It's a typical of most of our operation that, like for the case of National Water, when it comes to how we sustain our operations, basically we sustain operation from the revenue we get from the customers. So without that, then we do struggle. You know, we can't, we're not able to provide the services on a sustainable basis. So amid these challenges, what we've tried to do is we've continued operating, but also there are things we've had to do following the directives we've also got from government.
Excuse me, Mahmoud.
Yes.
If you want to share your presentation, you can just share your screen.
Yeah, I'm going to share the slides that I think are relevant.
Right.
What we try to do, the first thing we try to do, I think Matthew mentioned it, was to make sure that we have all the stock of the things we need to make sure that we sustain our operations, from the chemicals, from the fuel we have, and the materials for operations. So these things were stocked. The good thing, National, we have what we refer as framework contracts. So we don't have to go through any procurement, but we have to place orders. And we're able to place orders with most of our service providers, and we had stock. So right now I can say we guarantee 6 months stock. So irrespective of when the lockdown ends, we're able to sustain our operations. Now, most of the utilities, and I think National Water, one of them, and this could be most of the utilities we need in Africa, we are challenged that we were not able to provide 24-hour supply in all our operations. So for the case of, I'll talk about Kampala. That map shows you the boundaries of Kampala. We have areas, there's been massive expansion because of urbanization and high population growth. So we still have areas, especially the outskirts of the city, where we're not able to provide 24-hour supply. So in this situation, though we have ongoing project, we have a big project that we hoped was supposed to be complete around December, that was supposed to have addressed that problem. But amid this challenge, we had to make sure that everyone within the city is able to get water reliably. So what I had to do was to establish the rapid response teams, you know, so that in the people in the outskirts, in case you have any water supply interruptions, we're able to respond to it within the shortest time possible. The other thing we had to do was to establish a rationing program. Now with the lockdown means that we had less demand from the industry, from the commercial institutions, but we had more demand on domestic. Now, because of infrastructure constraints, still there are some areas in the outskirts that we're not able to provide water to. So we had to establish rationing programs where we know some certain areas are able to receive water on a certain predefined periods of time. And we had to make sure that we are consistent with that schedule as well. But also there are places whereby even with rationing, they are not able to provide, to give them water. So what we've tried to do is to, for those places, we have constructed public water points. And I think that map shows you where our boundaries are, but also places where we've tried to put public water points. So this has been done in partnership with the private sector. We have the MTN, which is a telecom company. We've also worked with the manufacturer of pipes, they're called Roofings, and also some of the contractors, Sojia Satom, they are doing one of the projects. So during this period, we have had a partnership with them, and they have made contributions. And with those contributions, we've managed to construct public water points, and these water points, we've installed them with storage tanks, 10 cubic meter storage tanks. And also we go to water bowsers. So areas where we are sure we cannot supply water, we have used the bowsers to fill those tanks. And the intention here is that during the time when people need water, you're able to provide it on a consistent basis. So you have a number of the maps, gives you an indication of some of the places that we managed to install these points. So again, I think someone was asking, how do you engage contractors? So in this particular case for us, we've had to partner with them to make sure that they become part of the solution. In how do we make sure that people receive water? The other thing we've tried also, because hygiene again is important, and we have highly congested places within the city. So we've partnered with the Kampala City Authority. During the lockdown, one of the services that were allowed to continue operating were food vendors. So the markets remained open, and the idea was that people needed food. So what we've tried to do is work with the city authority, and we put up hand washing points in those highly congested places, especially markets. So these partnerships, we've done it with the city authority, where we've identified some of those places. And even before the lockdown, we had the taxi parks that were also open, and we've tried also to install hand washing points. So these points, people are able to get, able to keep the hygiene, and then the cost of this is more or less covered between us and the city authority. Now, as an operator also, the government came out strongly and directed that we can't disconnect. I think most utilities within Africa will use disconnection as a method for revenue collection or debt management. So one of the things that we had to suspend was debt collection. Was disconnection. So this time around, we had again to more or less do more engagement with the customers to make sure that we sell the value of water. We had to convince them, or we are trying to convince them, that water is one of the most valuable resource or service that we need right now. And for us to keep sustaining it, we need you to continue paying your bills. So it's been more of a convincing approach than the other approach where you disconnect and then someone has to pay. And we're getting some bit of lessons from this, and we realize that actually sometimes if you communicate, if you engage properly, people can pay without them being disconnected. So a number of measures have been put, one emphasizing that people get water, and as National Water, we've made efforts to make sure that happens. Now the challenge which we have, and again, in each country, the situation is slightly different, because the way you sustain operation in the country where government comes out fully and finances all the interventions that are needed. In our case, again, National Water is responsible to make sure that we sustain our operations. And we haven't got a lot of support from government for that effect. So we're still relying on the revenue that we're getting from the customers to sustain our operations. So what that has meant is that we've had to prioritize our operations, and it goes down to what Matthew talked about. We're only focusing on critical services that we need for operations. So we've had to suspend a number of non-core services and focus on those services that are related to providing reliable water supply to our customers during this period. So those are some of the lessons we've learned, but I think one of the most key one has been engagement with the community. We've made them to realize that just like the health services, water is one of those critical services that people can't do without, especially in this period. Now, in our case, we've been telling them that for us to continue sustaining this service, we need them to support us, and we need them to pay for it. And that's how we manage to operate. It's still a challenge to us, but every month and every week that we go through, we learn lessons, and those lessons are making us better in the way we're operating right now. So
you're done.
yes, I'm done.
Yes, thank you a lot, Mr. Mahmoud, for sharing with us. I guess you mentioned a couple of points that we are going to talk about too right now. I would like to invite my colleague Yanis back so that he can speak to us about financial and economic aspects. Thank you a lot. Yanis?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mateusz. And indeed, I want to talk a little bit about the analysis of the financial and the economic situation, but this is, I will keep it very short because it can only be a very general recommendation, because this is an aspect that depends a lot on the local context that you're in. Just to give you some ideas on what you might be able to do in case that you're experiencing severe problems on the economic side. So, and then later Yoram is going to talk a bit more about it from the practical experience. But here are some ideas with what you could do if you have some difficulties. You might, for example, evaluate if there are any possibilities for using unallocated operating funds or other sources of funding to cover operating costs and expenses during and after the pandemic. Also, if you're so far reliant on physical payments, so people coming to the office and paying their bills directly at the counter, which obviously now is a difficulty and cannot be done very well with the contemporary health regulations. You might want to consider changing to online payment or mobile phone payments. So there's some digital opportunities maybe to explore. Thirdly, you might want to ask or offer solvent individuals or companies whether they want to do payments in advance so that you can increase your funds again to maintain your liquidity. Also, you could maybe negotiate with the fiscal authorities of your country over a support for permitting delayed payments or reduced tax rates. And lastly, maybe you could establish a payment plan with external contractors and suppliers so that you can maintain liquidity. But these are some very general ideas, and we cannot go into much more detail because, as I said, this is very local. But I think we will hear about it a bit more now by Yoram Singnyagwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. I would like to invite now Mr. Yoram Willem Singnyagwe, and he will speak about this financial and economic dimension. I would like to ask you, Mr. Yoram, hello, good afternoon. I would like to ask you if you could quickly talk to us about your company, how many customers does it have, how many workers, and just a quick word on the current situation of COVID in your country. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and hello everyone. I hope I'm loud and clear. Yeah, so basically I'm going to share a little bit on the experiences that we've had here in Zambia. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Okay, so that is the outlay of my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about Lukanga water in the introduction. Then I'll also share with the attendees of this conference on the situation at the moment in Zambia. that is pertaining to COVID-19. Then I'll dwell more on the financial and economic planning, an introduction that has been made by Yanis. Please, next slide. Yeah, so Lukanga Water and the Sanitation Company currently operates in 8 districts of Central Province. If you look on the screen that I'm sharing with you, there is a Central Province right in the center of the Republic of Zambia. We started operations in 2007. It's ideally quite a new company if we compare to most companies that are presenting this afternoon. And then in Zambia, we actually have a situation where in every province, there is almost like one utility company. So you can see that we have got actually 10 provinces in Zambia. On the Copper Belt, it's a unique situation where we have 3 utility companies. Otherwise, Lukanga Water is covering operations in Central Province. It's a private company registered under the Companies Act, and its shareholding is owned by the municipalities that are found in the province central. Can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so as a CEO or commercial utility company, if you like, we are self-sustaining. Like Mahmoud said, we actually depend on our own initiatives, operations to ensure that we collect revenue, and that revenue is used to operate entirely the company. We do not get any grant from government or any organization as it were, apart from probably special projects. But otherwise, day-to-day operations, we rely on our own income generation. This is important as we will be discussing on how Lukanga Water has tried to survive by putting up various initiatives in terms of how it collects money and generate revenue. We are servicing a population of just under 500,000, that is in Central Province, and within this population, I mean, within this service coverage, we're only able to reach just under 400,000. In terms of the number of customers, we have got 29,000 connections, of which just around 27,000 are domestic and the rest are commercial. In terms of the number of employees, we are just under 272. But when we include also temporary contractuals or small contractors, if you like, we're just under 300 at the moment. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the first case of COVID-19 coincidentally was reported actually on the 19th of March. This was a case of a couple, I think, that had traveled to Italy. And when they came back through the screening process, it was discovered they were actually had the disease. But here in Central Province, the first case was only recorded almost a month after. That was on the 17th of April in 2020. At the moment in Zambia, we have got a cumulative number of about 753 cases. What is not showing on the screen is the data of fatalities. We've only had actually about 7 deaths so far, which are COVID-19 related. And in terms of Central Province, where we are operating, right now we are seated on a number of about 28, of which we only have had only 1 recovery. Lukanga Water and Sewage Company, as mentioned earlier, is operating in this region. And if you recall from the last slide, you realize that we're actually bordering all provinces in Zambia. We have got some kind of contact with all provinces in Zambia in that we are central. So this is the update at the moment as of yesterday. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we did sit down as a company to try and prepare an emergency response plan. I will not go into much more detail in this, but basically it takes the form of which was shared earlier in the beginning of the conference. But you realize that we actually had to look at extracting emergency humanitarian elements of the government of the Republic of Zambia, which actually presented a bigger plan as regards to health, by specifically including activities by other clusters also in response to this outbreak. The response plan, interestingly enough, could cost us just around $5 million for us to completely implement, if at all we had to move from all stages. I think those stages have been highlighted by many presenters through all the 4 stages up to when we think that probably we can get to normality, if at all we get to full lockdown. It must be stated that at the moment in Zambia, we are not really actually operating under full lockdown. It's more like semi-lockdown, where we're just observing strict measures as guided by the central government. Next slide, please. So after the announcement of the 2 discovered cases that I talked about earlier, our government asked us to complement their effort by avoiding what we are calling reinforcements in terms of revenue collections. Unfortunately, the custom or attitude of our customers is that they only respond in terms of payments when they know that we are going to carry out these reinforcements in terms of disconnections. I think the gentleman Mahmoud from Uganda mentioned about this. So when the announcement was made, in January we were collecting around 91% of whatever we billed. The collections dropped to 63% in March 2020, which implied that basically from the collections we could not even sustain the 2020 budget, as it were. This created quite a lot of challenges for us, and as part of a response we had to sit down and come up with certain measures. One of the things that has helped us is to update customer information for ease of communication. This is important because the only way you're going to reach these customers and get any response or even feedback from them is if at all you have the updated information. So there has been an in-house creation of a phone app that meter readers use for reading, and using this app time and again we upgrade it just to ensure that we collect specific information that is needed for us to reach out to our customers. This includes also getting, for instance, latest phone numbers, because sometimes customers, they move from one house to the other in terms of probably them changing location or maybe leaving that house which is rented property or any other reason that you may think of. Then we had to enhance also our call center to specifically focus on engagements of customers. So on a day-to-day basis, the team in the call center comes up with a debtors list, and this now we follow it relentlessly to ensure that we speak one-on-one sometimes with customers who we think should be responsive. We explained in as easy and good language as possible, so to say, where we ask them to really come through and help us sustain operations, especially that we are not relying on any support from government. Our government even if they may be willing to fund this emergency response plan, but they are also overwhelmed with quite a lot of issues. And we have to realize that we are not the only ones who they can take care of. Of course, we have also been doing frequent sending of short message texts to customers. This can only be supported if at all you have an updated customer database, and this is where the application of the application of the software that we designed has come in to really help us ensure that we really, from time to time, get updated information. We also had to engage suppliers, such as the power utility company, to provide service on credit and suspend payment planned until after probably the COVID-19. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Last week, we came up with another initiative where now we are writing personalized letters to customers to support the water utility company. Then we discussed also with heads of department, section heads, and other supervisors to propose areas where we could, for instance, scale down on expenditure. Of course, some projects have been suspended for this year, but also we had to engage in terms of governance, our board of directors, to ensure that certain objectives are realigned. Of course, being a corporate institution that observe corporate governance, good corporate governance practices, we have been given objectives by our board of directors. So we also had to communicate with them that, look, some of the objectives may not be realized, and we have to realign objectives. Training of frontline staff is also important. They need to be reminded on how to engage customers, just so that we can have a win-win situation. And of course, we have continued actively engaging partners, some of who have responded with promises, and also some of them have actually even have been informed they have started procurement of certain chemicals. I think this will really help us aid our operations in terms of how we continue providing a service to our customers. Next, please. Of course, in conclusion, I think like the first, one of the first speakers said, I think it was a professor from Randwater, we need to come up with resilient policies and strategies. And I think one of the issues has been discussed and talked about in briefly, where we're saying that I think we need to also come up with very accurate and effective information systems. Other than that, when you look at institutions such as Lukanga Water, which provide a service depending on almost entirely on the power company, I think in future it will be important for us to come up with alternative sources of energy, for instance. This is important so that in future, in case we are faced with such a pandemic, then we'll be able to stand on our own. This is what I had to share with you, colleagues. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Oram, for your contribution. Thanks a lot. I think we are now finishing our expositions. The idea here was to discuss, as I said, aspects of the document we prepared with you guys, just taking out the main elements and further detailing it with experiences from service providers on the ground. This we think is a very important approach so that we may say it's possible to do things, it's possible to adapt our management strategies, it's possible to continue to deliver service with quality to all. And that was the main idea. If you look at the document, you will find in the annex several tables, several Excel sheets that help you with the organization of data, of information about all aspects that we discussed. And I think it might be a very useful tool for you to organize information. As just to conclude, a quick word on a few aspects. As we said, being prepared is maybe the most efficient, the most important tool for facing the COVID threat and other threats that might come. We discussed here the pandemic response team, strategies, composition, how does it work, what it should do, how it should communicate and define communication strategies, not only to the staff, but also to users. We discussed several management issues that are important to be considered in this pandemic situation. And we said that we want that the document, the idea of the document is actually just pointing out measures and examples of measures that might be considered and that should be adapted to the context of each service provider. As a couple of points to be discussed, we considered that it's very important that the service providers in this moment do not forget the importance of delivering water to the vulnerable populations. We have lots of doubts. We have not understood fully what is this COVID pandemic, but we know for sure that washing the hands is maybe the most efficient way of avoiding COVID. So people need to have access to water. It's no news. It's nothing new that water prevents illnesses. But in this COVID pandemic, it's more than ever important that vulnerable people have access to water. And a very important topic too is that the service providers, maybe through the pandemic response team, that these service providers are in constant contact with the public authorities responsible for health issues and also with international organizations, so that we can be always up to date, because this illness to face this illness is very important that we have the latest information, because everything, it's very dynamic. Every day we learn new things, and this contact with public authorities, mainly health authorities, and also international organizations is very important. From our side, I thank you a lot. I thank Yanis and Marina, and I thank also our expositors from today, Professor Kazan, Yoram, and Mahmoud. And I would like to go to the questions and answers session. Normally, as I said, we make our questions here through the chat, but since we are 20 people, I would try to do something different today. I think it would be nice if we have here a couple of questions already from I understand that Thomas asked the first question to Professor Kazan is not here anymore with us, or is he there? Is Thomas still there? I think he left. I would state then the question that Thomas did for Professor Kazan, and I would like then to open the microphones from the colleagues that are asking questions so that we may have a sort of debate. I'm sorry. So Professor Kazan, I have here a question from Thomas for you. He asks how to involve subcontractors in these plans. Could you please, Professor Kazan, answer this question from Thomas?
Sure. Thanks, Thomas, for the question. Yes, we have several ways that I perhaps omitted to mention that contractors and subcontractors have been working because they were also classified as essential services. So they were permitted to continue their work. For example, when it comes to pipe bursts, sometimes we have our own staff that do the repair, but where we need emergency contractors, they were operational, we had to bring them in. Critical maintenance, laboratory equipment, for example, if you would have a breakdown there. IT contractors, yes, we needed the IT contractors. Security, as one of my colleagues indicated, is an outsourced function. Chemicals, importantly, yes, is one of the resources you want to be considering upfront to ensure that you have supply. And interestingly, not only having supply, but a lot of the raw materials from chemicals comes from China. So one has to be circumspect whether those raw materials will come into the country for the chemicals to be formulated and manufactured. And then another example could be waste disposal. And waste disposal takes on another feature because you have all of these masks that staff are wearing, you have the protective equipment, it needs to be disposed of in a specific way, not like ordinary waste. And so you need those contractors that come and take care of that as well. So I trust I've given some examples, and yes, as far as we could, you keep the business running with all of your service providers that are available depending on the lockdown status, and keep the water flowing, so to say.
Thank you a lot, Professor Kazan. We have here a couple of questions from our other colleagues. We have here a question from Dr. Papa Samba Diop. We have a couple of comments from Gift Monde. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right. And I see that already Mr. Mahmoud has already answered here in the chat, and Christoph Platzer has also a question for Mahmoud. And also a question for Yanis. Maybe we could try and, since we don't have many questions, we could maybe open here the microphone. I'm now talking to my colleagues, Carol and the other colleagues. Could you please open the microphone from Dr. Papa Samba Diop so that he can direct his question to
yes.
Our expositors?
Yes,
please.
Now everyone can unmute themselves. So, but yeah, he's unmuted.
Dr. Papa.
I can take the floor.
Hello, welcome.
Yeah. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. And thank all the panelists. I'm very glad to be here. with some coming from the Afua. I'm the president of the committee. So I think the first, I know several activities are developed by KCCA and National Water. During this pandemic time, how they manage their effort together in order to face this pandemic? Because I suppose National Water have an organizing, and KCCA have another one. This is my first question. And the second one is speaking about financial affairs. More and more, it is very difficult for utilities to face this pandemic without additional fees. And we have experience in Ivory Coast. There is a tampon, how to say, fund between SODECI and the government. And during the war, it is a fund which is used in order to face some problems. I think more and more our activities have to develop this kind of organization. Do they think about it? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I see that you asked Mahmoud. We have also a question from Christoph Pata to Mahmoud. Christoph, would you like to state your question directly, please? Could we please open Christoph's microphone, and
okay.
then Mahmoud can answer both questions.
Okay, thank you, Mahmoud. It was very interesting to hear about the hand washing stations. And we in Peru, we have hand washing stations as well. And there has been a challenge when these stations are not connected to the pipe network. So we have to fill up a reservoir. How do you control that and the frequency? How do you do that? Did you develop some protocol for that? That would be helpful to get your experience on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. So Mahmoud, we have two questions for you. Could you please answer both?
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the one for the president, Papa Samba. Like you said, in the case of Kampala or in Uganda, National Water is responsible for, our mandate is really with storage services. Then we have in this case, Kampala, the city authority, that is the Kampala City Authority, that is supposed to be responsible for sanitation. So what we've tried to do in this period, like I said earlier, we've tried to harmonize our plans and our responses. The two institutions are part of the task force. So when it comes to sanitation, especially in the informal settlements, we had to put our hands together to make sure that we are able to respond to all the sanitation challenges in those particular areas. So it's been a joint effort. You know, you see, the beauty with such challenges, they provide you with opportunities. So this has given us an opportunity to coordinate and cooperate. And there are lessons we are learning, which lessons will inform the new normal, like Professor Amath mentioned. So it has been teamwork in this particular case. And I think the purpose has been to make sure that the communities and the population get the service that they need right now. So it has been a lesson, it has been an experience, and hopefully we've learned something that is going to help us moving forward. Now, from Plata from Peru, the hand washing points we put up again, we've done them. It has been also a partnership with KCCA, that is the Kampala City Council Authority. What we've done, all the hand washing points we put up, we've metered them. So they come with a meter. So in our case, water is provided continuously. So now when it comes to the soap, the city authority has also put an operator. So each point has someone who oversees its operation. So they are properly connected to the distribution system. All the hand washing points are connected to the distribution system, and we meet at them actually. And then we have an operator who oversees the operations around those points. So the city authority provides the soap, National provides the water. Again, it's been teamwork and it's been a cooperation arrangement. And we have regular engagements to see where we're having challenges, how can we solve them with the operators, with the two institutions. So that's how we manage to operate. And so far, it has been a smooth operation throughout the operation.
Thank you a lot, Mahmoud. We have now a question from Dr. Papa to our colleague Yanis.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I really understood the question, because I think the sound wasn't very good, at least for me, when you were speaking, Mr. Papa. But from what I think you said, it seems to me that it's a rather local question of Côte d'Ivoire. I don't know if this kind of a fund is available in other contexts. And also, I think maybe it's a bit more of a question: should politics, should the government be more supportive of water and sanitation operators? I think that's the way I read it when you wrote it in the chat. And in that regards, yes, of course, it should be supportive. But I also would be cautious of not only putting all the sort of blame or the task with the government. I think companies can do things themselves, as we heard in the presentation by Mr. Yoram. But I'm not sure if I correctly answered your question. Maybe you would like to reformulate that.
Maybe we can I'm not sure, Dr. Papa, if the question is answered. Would you like to state it again? And maybe we can open to the other expositors too, to Mahmoud, to Professor Kazan, and to Yoram, so that they can maybe do their final statements, since we don't have any questions. Dr. Papa, please.
Yeah, thank you. I want to clarify my question. My question is just to know if Yanis, in his utility, think about a fund between the operator and the government. And I give the example of Ivory Coast. In Ivory Coast, there is a fund between SODECI, the utility which care for water and sanitation, and the government. And it is very important to have this fund in order to face immediately some difficulties. And I give the example of the war, the year of the war. It is this fund who enable SODECI to continue to ensure the services. I think it is something utility in Afua have to make, because I think it's very important in order to help us in order to face some pandemic like COVID. Just to know if they think about this form of organization. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for this clarification. We have not really thought about this option yet, but I think it's a very interesting one which should be explored. but just to also remind you that the plan we presented is not really going into the analysis of the financial situation very much. It's more on the personnel planning, etc. side. But definitely, it's a very interesting point, and it should be discussed.
Thank you, Yanis. Thank you, Dr. Papa. We have here Oscar Chanda that he has raised his hand, and other two. Romas has already raised his hand, and yes, I would like to please. Could you please open the microphone from Oscar Chanda so that he can directly ask his question, and then Romas, please. So we do another block, and we answer both questions at once. Thank you, Oscar, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this amazing discussion, or rather learning. My name is Chanda Oscar. I'm a chemical engineer from Zambia. And my question is directed to Engineer Yolam Sinyangwe, who is the Managing Director for Lukanga Water and Sewerage. And my question is on the meter readers, or rather those workers they sent to read the meters from the households. How is the company ensuring that they are well equipped with PPE, knowing that they are moving from households to households, which can pose dangers to them contracting the coronavirus? So my emphasis, or rather my question, is on the PPE. How are they ensuring that the meter readers are well equipped with the PPE? Are they going with enough PPE as they carry out their routine works, which is meter reading in these households?
Thank you a lot, Oscar. I would like to ask Romas, please, to ask his question.
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone. My question is also to Yoram. It's about the money. You mentioned that the pandemic plan would cost you like 5 million for 3 months. I'm pretty sure that this does not include loss of income, which seems to be the bigger problem. Can you give me an idea how much money is that in comparison? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Romas. So we have two questions for Yoram, and I would like also to ask Mahmoud and Professor Kazan if they have anything else to comment, so that we have another block and maybe the final block, and then we can please. Can you please, Yoram, answer the questions?
Thank you very much for those two questions. I'll start with the question by Oscar. Yes, indeed. After we came up with the emergency response plan, one of the objectives of the plan was to also look at the safety of our employees. Now, for the meter readers, they're actually very, very critical in the operations of the water utility company, especially in our environment, in that they are the ones who actually reach out to all the customer properties at least once in a month. So what we needed to do was actually to start with them by first and foremost training them on safety issues. I personally, as head of the company, actually had to also address them because they were the first frontline staff who could at least even step in to assist the company survive through this time, especially when it comes to collection of information. Remember that I'd talked about accurate information from customers being critical, especially when it comes to reaching out to customers, talking to them. So we had to ensure that we spoke to our meter readers, who are called customer service assistants in our organization. So we spoke to them, then we had to ensure that we procured enough PPE. These are face masks, provide them with hand sanitizers, as well as gave them at least some strict lecture on how they can keep safe. Very, very important. I hope I've answered that question from Oscar. Then when it comes to loss of income, I'm not sure whether we could call it loss of income at the moment, because it's too early for us to say that we have really lost income. We have not discontinued service, but what has dropped actually is actually a reduction in the collection of this revenue. So two things, you have to separate the two things. The billing aspect, which is the revenue, we have continued producing invoices as it were, okay? But the collection is what has reduced, in that we are not actually withdrawing service from defaulting customers. So only probably after, probably next month, we will be able probably to know whether we have lost income. But at the moment, no, we have not lost income, but we have lost the collection rate. I hope I'm not confusing you people from my explanation. In fact, from last month to this month, we have seen actually an increase in the consumption of our water supply, in that it appears people are using more water. Maybe it's because they are trying to be more hygienic, but I think it's because there's no withdrawal of service, and even those who are defaulting have still continued to receive the service. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Yoram, for this clarification. Since we do not have any questions anymore, I would like to give back the word to Professor Kazan so that he can make his final statements, and then to Mahmoud, and then we can finish our debate today. Professor Kazan, would you like to speak a little more?
Thank you very much. I won't be long. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the speakers, obviously, all of my colleagues, and importantly, this important association and relationship between the German Water Partnership and EFWA. Having been involved in EFWA myself, I'm particularly sensitive to this arrangement that we have in place, and delighted to be a part of seeing that you know, here's one positive spin-off of the COVID virus. Had the virus not have arrived, we would not be having this conversation today and galvanizing this relationship between all of these fantastic water utilities that are trying to do their best in the African continent, and us trying to spread you know, share a word of best practice or some form of experience, so that we can each get better at what we do, and in that way we can improve water and sanitation in the continent. So I'm delighted to having been part of this, and I thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you a lot, Professor Kazan. I would like to give Mahmoud also a final word. Mahmoud, would you like to give your final statements? Your microphone, you must turn your microphone on. Yes.
So I would also want to add on to what Professor said, thank the German Water Partnership for organizing this webinar. And I think more of this will help us share experiences and lessons. Maybe this is the new normal moving forward, where we don't have to wait for the STC meetings to learn and share what is happening in the different utilities. But also what it shows that because one of the things we've tried to do, all the things we're trying to do right now, we're doing them by ourselves. I think this lockdown has also made us realize that as Africa, as utilities, we have strength that we thought we never had. I think before the COVID, you would have a situation whereby most of us would have run to consultants, development partners for support. But I think this time around, most of us have had to live with what we have. The limited resources we have, we've realized that you can do so much with them. And even the staff we have, like I think Professor said that we're able to work with less people. And even expertise is in country. So there are so many lessons and there's so many good things that are seem to be coming out of this situation. One is that most of these solutions have to take into context the local situation. There might not be one perfect way of solving these challenges, and each country has its own way how it has gone about it. And sharing these experiences, I think, helps us to perfect our own solutions, and I think it's a very good thing. Hopefully, you can continue with it.
Thank you a lot, Mahmoud, for your words. I grab your final words. I agree with you. Maybe it's the most important message that we are trying to bring is that solutions are possible and that they have to be tailored within the cultural and specific context of every country, of every service provider. I think it's a very important message that you gave, and we all agree with you. I thank you for your inputs. I thank also Yoram and Professor Kazam for their experiences. I thank our colleagues for the inputs. And of course, I thank also the German Water Partnership and the African Water Association for allowing us to have this very interesting afternoon with you. From my perspective, from our side, it was very, very nice. It's my second time, so to speak, in Africa. So it's been a pleasure. I learned a lot from you guys, and I would like to give the word back to Mr. Usher so that he can formally close our event. Mr. Usher, please.
Thank you, Matthews. Well, it has been a very good pleasure to have this on. We hope that tomorrow will be also very great. And definitely the German Water Partnership and the African Water Association getting together, I think that it's a good, very, very interesting marriage. So hope everybody appreciated it, and I hope to see you soon in other topics. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Usher. Maybe we can all open our cameras and see each other so then we can make a beautiful picture from us all.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, take care.
Thank you. This is an activity, but yeah, protect it, our silage, okay.